Welcome to this Chamber Low Carbon live lunch and learn. I'm Stephen Sykes and I manage the Chamber Low Carbon programme, and I'm your host for today's session. Just a few housekeeping items before we start. All participants are on mute, so if you've got any questions, please use the Q&A facility at the bottom of your screen, and my colleague Darren Thomas and myself will be monitoring to capture your questions. Today's session is being recorded and will be available to watch again on the Chamber Low Carbon YouTube channel. For those unfamiliar with the programme, Chamber Low Carbon is brought to you by East Lancs Chamber of Commerce in partnership with the North and West Lancs Chamber of Commerce, Business-Wise Solutions and Boost, supporting businesses across Lancashire to go green, save money and reduce their carbon footprint. Charlie, if you could move on, thank you. Part funded by the European Union, European Regional Development Fund, this £4 million programme provides a suite of free services to help businesses in Lancashire to improve energy and environmental efficiencies, introduce on-site renewable energy generation, and by doing so, save money. The programme also helps Lancashire businesses that are developing new low-carbon technologies to bring their products to market, facilitate them being manufactured in Lancashire, and to help them find demonstrator sites.
Okay, thank you, Steve.
If I could just finish off, and I'll do your introduction, Charles. Today's live lunch and learn will be delivered by Charley Rattan, and is focused on the business opportunities for the hydrogen economy. Charley has been a respected energy insider and influencer for over 25 years, with a track record of successful major project delivery, is a trusted strategic advisor to global energy companies, and an advocate and facilitator for the emerging innovation energy market. Charley, if you'd like to take the floor.
Thank you, Stephen. Thanks to my friends at Chamber Low Carbon. It's nice to be with you again. That's my gruesome face with slightly envious of the hairstyle and that, but it's certainly not like that at the moment. Perhaps it's wise to not have the the camera pointed at myself today. So I'm here to take you through I'll be here for about 40 minutes with you. We're going to just take a high level view of some of the business opportunities for the hydrogen economy. That's a little bit about me. I'm quite busy at the moment. Hydrogen is quite a kind of topical subject. I conduct strategic business advice for Pangea Strategic Intelligence. That's what SI stands for. I'm currently delivering the Hydrogen Heroes for the World Hydrogen Leaders training regime for the Green Power Global Green Power Academy, and act as an advisor to those considering entering the hydrogen market. A lot of interest from SMEs, from supply chain, tier 1, tier 2 companies, and especially from major oil and gas companies at the moment. A little bit about hydrogen. Whenever you go to a hydrogen event, it doesn't take long before that rather dramatic image on the right is referred to, and that was the Hindenburg, I think it was 1936, because hydrogen is combustible. It's a gas. It's one of the most abundant elements on the planet, if not the most, but it is combustible. It has no flame or odour, a bit like methane, and it's got a smaller, different molecular structure to methane, so it is prone to leaking. And it burns at higher temperature with nitrous oxide, and there are a few things that fall out of that. That legacy is one that you will come across quickly in the hydrogen world when you engage with stakeholders. But the UK is trying to remedy that. Obviously, there's so much noise around hydrogen at the moment that you will have, I'm sure, have heard about some of the background aspects of it. But the UK PLC, if you like, has identified hydrogen as worthy of further study and is funding it. And there is a programme out there called Hydeploy, which is split into 4 bite-sized chunks. And Hydeploy 1 was a trial. It's trying to address the legacy of the Hindenburg and trying to say, well, is it really as scary as that image looks? I come from an oil and gas background, and there's certainly been some unfortunate incidents offshore of Scotland that feature in every health and safety course I've ever been on, and the Hindenburg crops up too. But to try to counter the image and the scariness, if you like, of the Hindenburg, the government set up a thing called Hydeploy 1, which is a small-scale demonstrator built at Keele University. You might have heard of this. It's been running over a year, and the good news is that it was successful. It shows that hydrogen is not as scary as the Hindenburg indicates. It can be successfully moved around a network. This one was up to 20%, so they injected 20% of hydrogen into a gas grid. Seems a bit arbitrary. Why stick at 20%? Well, I think the feeling is that you want people's existing kit to work, your gas fires, your boilers. You don't want to suddenly have people saying, well, it's all very well to put hydrogen into the network, but we can't use our gas fire anymore, which isn't going to go down well. So 20% is a good figure and can be done safely, because the year of research at Keele University indicates that that's been successful. That is going to be fed into a thing called Rio 2, a consultation round, and will be baked in, if you like, into the gas regs going forward. After Hydeploy 1, surprise, surprise, there's going to be Hydeploy 2, which was due to start now. As we've found today, a few things have got in the way of that. So Hydeploy 2 is slightly delayed. It will come back on stream sooner rather than later, and it ties in well. The town of Gateshead has got very ambitious carbon neutral targets, and Hydeploy 2 is at Winlaton, which is a part of Gateshead. Hydeploy 3, we're going to be talking to quite a bit of length today, because it's right here. It's in our region. It's the northwest of England. It's at the forefront of carbon capture and storage, but also green hydrogen as well. So we're going to come back to Hydeploy 3. And Hydeploy 4 is assuming that Hydeploy 3 is successful. All these things tend to be granular and dependent on the previous step. No point having Hydeploy 4 if there's a problem discovered at Hydeploy 3. But Hydeploy 4 is the proposed national rollout. They want to pick perhaps one region to be an exemplar. If that's successful, then we'll go for a national rollout of hydrogen. And that will need government intervention, perhaps support, and some further net zero target realisation. So this is the Keele. This is what has been discovered in the last year or so. They've blended hydrogen with methane. As I mentioned, hydrogen is much lighter. So anybody involved in the manufacturing of pipelines or fittings at the end particularly needs to be aware that, yes, you can use the existing network, which is good news. Some of it's quite aged, but it will need modifying. You might need to line the long distance pipelines. You'll certainly need to modify the valves and the things at each end. So that's a problem, but it's also an opportunity. Where are we? Well, boiler-wise, and there are a lot of boilers and gas boilers in the UK, multi-millions of them, but both Worcester, Bosch, and indeed Baxi do have 100% ready hydrogen boilers already. On top of that, I think for new builds, that should say, there will be no new methane boilers in the UK from 2025. So that it's going to reduce the demand for existing boiler types, but increase perhaps the demand for the ones above, for the Worcester, Bosch and Baxi, and no doubt others as they enter the boiler market. Big opportunity there for those companies. These are some of the bigger schemes. It's not just a talk about regions, but some of the industries perhaps thinking a little bit more ambitiously. And this is just a first taster. We'll come back to this a little bit later. Here in the Northwest, we have two important advantages over some of these clusters. The idea of clusters is gaining ground. It's come from offshore wind, towns like Grimsby, Barrow in Furness, Lowestoft. They've been transformed by offshore wind, and one of the drivers has been to gather the industries together in what they call clusters, sister industries, so that they can work together, innovate, and drive down costs. And I suspect that the clustering principle is coming to hydrogen. And here in the Northwest, we've got some big companies, Cadent, Johnson Matthey. But the good news for our region, or the Northwest, is that we do have some pretty extensive oil and gas fields off the Liverpool Bay, but also some salt caverns. And that will mean that we are very much a front runner for an integrated scheme. In fact, just this April, government funding was announced for our region. It depends on where you read that figure was either 120 million or considerably less than that. Chances are it'll be few stages to get to the bigger total. But nevertheless, funding has been given by the government, and the northwest of England will come in a little bit more detail. Is very, very much a front runner. There are others on the slide. You'll see there's one off St Fergus, one of the 4 key gas terminals, and there's one of South Wales as well, with Milford Haven equally important. Coming back to Hynet, which is the one that I think we're particularly interested. Yes, Win Latins of interest, but it's only marginal. It's only testing real world. But the real prize, perhaps, for us today is Hynet, which is Hydeploy 3. It's based around our region, Liverpool Bay. As I've just mentioned, oil and gas fields are already going to be decommissioned. That leaves a bit of a headache for the operators, especially if they're on the hook for decommissioning costs. And perhaps you can avoid them if you reuse it. So what better than looking at hydrogen? We've also got, especially in Cheshire, a very big important chemical industry, and that's making things like ammonia and fertilizers. There's already a venting of hydrogen going on in the northwest, and that's at Ineos at Runcorn, and we'll be looking to integrate that into Hynet, which is Hydeploy 3. There's been a big cost reduction in the cost of electrolyzers, which is driving the industry. Why now is the often question of the hydrogen economy. Well, 2 real reasons, I suppose. One I've already mentioned is the astonishing success of offshore wind. Costs now of offshore wind have dropped below £40 a megawatt hour, unthinkable only a few years ago, which makes it very attractive, because obviously electrolysis will need a lot of power, and if it's renewable, then it can be made in a green manner. And the other factor is the cost of electrolysis itself, which has plummeted in the last decade. So suddenly those two have met, and hydrogen's been around a long time, but they start to say, oh, this is economic now. And the scope ranges right through here in the northwest. Heavy goods vehicles, trains, hydrogen trains, for example, can be made at Alstom. We've got a facility at Widnes, right in the heart of the northwest. So it's good news for our region, for all those involved with those companies and potentially their supply chains. Some of the players there, you've got Cadenton, Johnson, Mathin, a little bit of a graphic. I'm not going to go through every slide today. They will be made available by Chamber Low Carbon. You can store, you can review them at your leisure, but some of the things that will be needed, if we were to go down a liquid hydrogen route, which is likely to be through ammonia, as opposed to a gas route through pipelines and compression and so forth. But liquid will need things like storage tanks and synergies with the fertilizer industry, agriculture. And again, that's all been a recipient of recent government funding. I'll just pause for questions. Stephen, if you've still got the microphone, I don't know if any questions have come through, but please feel free to fire questions. I'll just give a pause for a few seconds to see if anybody wishes to ask a question at this stage. If not, I'll resume the slide deck. Okay.
There's no questions so far.
Yeah, thanks for that. The bigger players at the moment is every day there's a national strategy or a roadmap or a regional strategy or roadmap, and there's some big figures out there. The biggest player in the hydrogen market is China. They've just announced a £12 billion investment as recently as March. We've seen on the ground, we've seen things like hydrogen fueling stations, they've quadrupled in the last 5 years. Sounds dramatic, but it was from admittedly quite a low base. The Treasury likes hydrogen, which is always good news, because it can be taxed. Some of the alternatives or sister technologies are more difficult to tax. Obviously, hydrogen is real. You can store it as a gas or a liquid, and that is taxable because you can measure it. Some of the things around the electrical infrastructure, electrical cars and electrical vans, are more difficult to gain revenue from the government for. Also, a couple of ancillary points that the existing outlets, if you're Shell and you've got 4,000 fuel stations, all with Shell Select supermarkets in them, you might be relieved to know that those retail outlets can still continue in the future, which is future-proofing for the relevant players. And there's just an example. Everybody is talking about hydrogen at the moment. My phone doesn't stop ringing about people wanting to know more about it. And it's one of the reasons why I thought this session for the Northwest and the region might be of use. A couple of the roadmaps. There's the United States, very much engaged, Singapore, and offshore. It looks rather fanciful to think about electrolysis offshore, but that is indeed being considered. I'm in a teleconference next week with a developer about a bit of advice for that. So that sounds fanciful, but people are looking at it now. Offshore, the town of the area of Groningen has taken this idea of clustering, and they want one. They've tied up with Gas Uni and my old company Shell, and they're looking at between 4 and 10 gigawatts of hydrogen production, and something similar on the German coast on a scheme called the West Cluster. And they're looking at bespoke offshore wind farms rather than generating electricity, the traditional reason for a wind farm. Should we not just design them just for hydrogen production with very different remit? You don't need to worry about grids. So that's been thought about in both Holland, in Germany, in Scotland, and indeed parts of the UK Round 4 scheme as well. We've got a green gas strategy. There's the frontispiece of it. It is available. It's on Google. It's quite a recent document. And in Germany, they've got a big gas network being proposed for around the town of city of Essen. But keep remembering that China will be the biggest market in the short run, at least. That's the largest global market, and it's seeking early mover advantage. Dutch, they want to get in on the act as well. They've got a strategy. I've mentioned the German one. One of the quirks is how to get the hydrogen to South Germany, where the big automakers are, Austria and others. And we've mentioned America. Australia has also wanted to become a player in the hydrogen. So it's hydrogen from going local, from places like Kiel and Cheshire, is looking to almost go in a quantum leap to go global from quite a small basis at the moment, admittedly. There's a nice image of our region. We're just right on the edge of that region, but you can see that the town of Warrington is very well placed to be part of the hydrogen future, as indeed is Chester. There's a lot of chemical industry north of Chester, Ellesmere Port. We've got Stanlow Refinery. We've got other elements of a future hydrogen economy, and you'll see offshore. You'll see that image contains an area for carbon capture, CO2, which is existing oil and gas underground facilities due to be decommissioned 2 or 3 years down the line, and also our regions in round 4, very much in the contention for major, perhaps up to 2 gigawatts of offshore wind being proposed for Liverpool Bay. You can see that the images of the turbines are there. Okay.
Charlie, we do have one question that's come through from Maud Gilliard. The price of hydrogen with offshore wind, what's it likely to be?
Yeah, good question. Hydrogen is measured in kilograms, Maud, and it's very expensive at the moment. It's around $10, I think, a kilogram. To make this really work, the industry has really got to be looking at $1 or $2 per kilogram, and that's the challenge. I think what the industry is saying is that that's tough, but let's look at offshore wind, which was phenomenally expensive at the start, and it was just not competitive. But it was supported, and by scaling and innovation, that has got down from, I think, $200 per megawatt hour to under 40. So that's really, it's just about the cheapest. It's cheaper, I think, than even gas now. It's so cheap. It's the cheapest of the major energy production. And I think the feeling is that if we do something the same, take the lessons learned from offshore wind with clustering, innovation, and especially scaling, then we can do the same. And I think the trajectory is good. As I say, I think electrolyzer costs are plummeting rapidly, and innovation is going to further drive that down as well. So those are indicative costs. It's got to fall by a significant amount. It's 4 times as expensive at the moment to install hydrogen as it is to install methane, which has been a blocker. And the most expensive form of hydrogen is green hydrogen from renewables. The cheapest is a thing called grey hydrogen, which is made from fossils. So hydrogen can be made from anything, that really, and it doesn't have to be green. It just works extremely well with green. So I hope that answers your question, Maud. If not, please let us know. The role of business, which is really what this session is about today. People have heard about hydrogen. They've learned it's a gas or a liquid. They've learned there's a lot of noise around it. But what's really needed, it's not for somebody in Whitehall to come up with something with a stroke of a pen. It's got to be delivered, and it's got to be delivered on the ground. And the engine of the UK economy is SMEs. So that's where the hydrogen economy, if it happens, will be delivered. There will be a contracts landscape. people will be looking for getting ahead of the business rivals. And I've put that image on for good reason. It doesn't have to be mega projects with fancy names like Gigastack, and it's all kinds of fanciful stuff out there. But the reality is that most bits of kit will be things like radiators and boilers and appliances, and that's perhaps why I put that image in there. And I want to think a little bit about how you get to the hydrogen market. It's obviously we don't have too much time today, but there are ways to get to the market, and a few things to avoid as well. So I suppose one of the things to avoid is to, if you might say, well, net zero is not going to happen. I'm going to ignore it. It's not going to happen. We're going to carry on doing what we've always done. We're going to stick with methane. We're a boiler manufacturer, and I suggest you might struggle. It's already happening. New builds are already going to start looking at future-proofing the builds to get planning permission. So I would not ignore the planning, the transition. If you want to do business with Manchester, they've got net zero by 2038, which is 12 years ahead of the UK. Liverpool 2040. So it's happening now. If you don't think about it, you might find that your vehicle that you travel into Greater Manchester might be subject to a surtax. It might be diesel. You might say, right, we're going to impose a diesel tax. It's already been thought about. But if you think about it now, and think, well, actually, I should be future-proofing, at least go for a hybrid, you can ignore some of the pain and get something of first mover advantage. You can also look at some of the corporate social responsibility aspects of companies. It's increasingly important. I know that Stephen's spoken about this, but it's having a real impact on the way companies do business. And they expect the supply chain, if you want to do business with us, this is how we do business, you might wish to harmonise. The renewables industry is one of the strongest on circular principles. You can expect them to be driving this. And the oil and gas companies are rapidly following suite as well, following that lead as well. And you want to also, if you do want to get involved, I would strongly, we saw the opening slide from Chamber Low Carbon, engage with Chamber Low Carbon, make sure that if you are wanting to get, companies will want the ISO series, they will want quality control. So make sure your company's ready to engage. The big players, that's why I've put the image on the right. If you want to engage with the Shells and the Eons and the BPs, you need to get your company fit for purpose. Nobody better than Chamber Low Carbon to talk to in the first instance, so prepare for that. This sectors, these are the sectors that are likely to flourish. These are the low-hanging fruit, if you like, in the coming years. The image on the right shows a particular type of forklift. It's a very narrow one, but it's hydrogen. It's perfect for hydrogen because it's quite heavy already, and it travels short distances, and it can be fueled on site. So a lot of warehouses, to meet their net zero targets, are turning to hydrogen forklifts. But behind that, some of the sectors that are ripe for conversion to hydrogen include transport. Already mentioned the Alstom facility at Widnes, already making hydrogen trains. Just big contracts announced this week for a further 12, and there'll be many, many more. Steel, there's can steel, which is a heavy energy user, could that be decarbonised? Cement, another high energy user. And agriculture, often forgotten in these discussions. But if you put the county of Cheshire and the wider northwest together, you'll see, well, certainly we've got transport, certainly we've got agriculture, certainly we've got manufacturing industry. So you might say, well, we're better to look for a route to market than on our very doorstep. Some recent announcements, there's one JCB and Wrightbus, depending on where you read, 4,000 or 3,000. Hydrogen buses, of course. The JCB have just taken over Wrightbus, the plant manufacturers. You can expect more. CEO of Bosch just announced a call for a hydrogen economy. Behind it, the European Green Deal, likely to be hydrogen-based, likely to be green hydrogen-based. And you see that there are examples of hydrogen successfully raising capital on the markets. And I've put the graphic in just to show some of the oft forgotten agricultural elements of this as well. Any further questions at this stage, Stephen, before I continue on the slide deck?
We had a follow-up question from Maud. Thanks you for the first question, or she thanks for the first question. What about nuclear power plants that's coming on stream in the UK? What would be implied on the cost, globally speaking, if you initially got
the only real nuclear build at the moment is Hinkley, which is a heavily redacted business case. under it, and quite an expensive supported one. I think it came in at £90 per megawatt hour. Bear in mind that I've just said that offshore wind's coming in under 40, so you've tied yourself into a contract over double the price of offshore wind. There were supposed to be 6 or 7 other Hincleys. There was one in Anglesey that's fallen away in East Mon, and that's gone. A lot of the infrastructure companies are now turning to hydrogen. I know that because I've led a proposal on that basis. And some of the other the existing nuclear plants, for example, in Cumbria, they've joined a thing called the Energy Alliance, which again has got a hydrogen element. So it suggests that there's not too much big-scale new nuclear happening in the UK in the short run. And where it is, they're already starting to link together in alliances. And of course, hydrogen can be generated by nuclear as well. There are a couple of trials out there as well for nuclear to hydrogen. Hydrogen is neutral, really. It's more of a carrier. And you can make it from coal, you can make it from steam reforming, but it works particularly well with renewables. But nuclear and hydrogen are not necessarily antagonistic to each other. So I hope that answers your question, Maud. If not, fire away and we'll have another go at it.
We have another question.
Yes.
Do you feel that we should fully sufficient on renewable energy generation before we're starting to use renewable energy to produce hydrogen? And what will be the pressures affecting that either way?
Can you just repeat that, please, Steve?
Do you feel that we should be fully sufficient in renewable energy generation?
Do I feel as though we should be fully sufficient on renewable
before we switch to hydrogen, or before?
I think I wouldn't necessarily wait. I come from a developer point of view, and I think you could be waiting a long time if you're certainly going to lose your first mover advantage if you wait for that to happen, because it'll be a while before the UK is fully, even with the quadrupling of offshore wind, it's still going to take a while for the grid to be entirely green. If you waited that time, you might be waiting. First of all, you'd miss your targets, your 2050 targets that you've signed up to, so there'd be a breach of that. More importantly, I think commercially, you would lose any advantage you might have, first mover advantage. UK at the moment is a world leader in offshore wind, and it wants to be at least up there with the pack for hydrogen. If you waited for that, you might find that other countries, Holland, Germany, China, America, Australia, they've left you behind, and you might have less. You might have missed some commercial opportunities. So I'd probably be minded to say no, don't wait.
Right. One more has just come through. Again from Maud. Comparatively to the Norwegian system, what do we have to do as guidelines to manage the decrease of our level of carbon?
Yeah, I mean, the Norwegians have got existing hydro, haven't they? Very high hydro facility. They've also got quite a strong oil and gas industry, so I wouldn't necessarily take a lead from Norway, because they've softened to some extent some of their stances. They've also got this state funding. They've got a big war chest, if you like. They put some of the money from oil and gas into a big chest, and it's accumulated, and they want to invest it, which is great, because they've got a lot of money to spend, which is very enviable. Guidance-wise, well, I suppose that we're right up there. We've signed the same treaties as Norway. We're world leaders. We're ahead of Norway in offshore wind. Norway is leading on floating offshore wind with Equinor and the high wind and that. So their future for offshore wind will be floating, because they've got a world leadership of it, and they will decarbonise. But I think probably we've got more ambitious targets than Norway. 2050 we've signed up to, and Norway and some of the Norwegian companies like Equinor have got slightly softer targets than other companies like Shell and Total and BP, which is slightly surprising. So I would say that we're right up there with Norway, if not ahead of them. So I hope that answers the question.
Okay.
Any more questions before?
No, that's it for now.
Okay. We've seen that this is very much a happening sector at the moment. It's not just talk. There have been some major MOUs, perhaps not the most exciting picture you'll ever see in your life, but it is people celebrating the signing of a memorandum of understanding. And BEIS and Department for International Trade are very much aware of the supply chain potential for hydrogen, and they want to include SMEs, as they have done for offshore wind. Further announcements, you can see yet another hydrogen roadmap, this one a mobility roadmap. I suspect that hydrogen is better for bigger pieces of kit, your trucks, your buses, and that EVs might be better for the smaller pieces of kit like your cars and so forth. That's what's emerging, but we've already mentioned the Bosch CEO. We've already got an existing cluster, if you like, already generating hydrogen, and it's here in the UK, up on the Orkneys, which has been a remarkable success. And here's one that I led last year. Didn't win that bid. I shouldn't really put the name of the company in, but it doesn't do any harm because they didn't win it. But Inismon, or Anglesey, the company, was very keen to get involved in Wales. We didn't win the tender, but we learnt a lot from it. And that company, Costain, is heavily involved with the South Wales cluster that I showed an image of. It's in the slide deck early on in this deck. Other contracts, offshore wind, I keep going on about the synergies between renewables and hydrogen. And there's no reason. You can see the turbines in the background, but the vessels, which are not cheap, they're going to be future-proofed, and they're going to be able to run on hydrogen propulsion. That's the first 4. I think the first contract has been let. I've already mentioned harmonise with corporate social responsibility elements of companies. And where might benefit from this? Well, you've got on our doorstep these towns. You don't have to go a long way. Barrow, Workington, Birkenhead, Mostyn, and the Humber as well. Further, ScotWind will have another hydrogen element attached to it. Watch that space. There'll be a floating element as well. So it's all happening here in the UK, and some of it is on our doorstep. What next? Well, I suggest that construction might be ripe for decarbonising. There's existing plants, Hyundai, a nice bit of kit ready for, and that is Hyundai already make that kind of thing. I would imagine JCB would be extremely interested, given that the fact that they've just bought the bus company and they're learning a lot about hydrogen very, very quickly. A few other issues that not just about net zero, but air quality. We're all enjoying certain aspects of lockdown. One notable fact is the air quality and perhaps noise. The plant itself, it's much quieter than existing diesels. And you've got these net zero cities, Manchester, Glasgow, Liverpool, not a long way away, Leeds. There will be others. And that will affect the contracts. So any existing companies want to get contracts, shows what you're doing, shows your net zero commitment, shows how your plant is aligning. Can you get your vehicles on a site, or is it diesel? We're not having them on our site. If you've got a hybrid or electric or a hydrogen one, you might find you get the contract even if you're not the cheapest price. Another image, which you probably, I like this because it's our region, slightly more detail. And also this image contains one thing that some of these grand faluting images sometimes don't, and that is people. People forget there's a real people element of this. You can have all the strategies and roadmaps in the world, but never forget that it's about people. So you've got to show how they will benefit. Not everybody's going to be delighted at a pipeline going through the bottom of their street or some new infrastructure built. But if there are jobs and opportunities, just like with wind and offshore wind in particular, you might find that people are actually quite well disposed. And that's an image of how our region, you'll notice it's got hydrogen trains. It looks like, I'm not sure if that's the Cecil Carlisle line that they're thinking about on there, whether it's just a generic image, but it's starting to creep and it's on our doorstep. So offshore wind, vessels, carbon capture and storage, existing facilities can be reused. And the city of Chester sitting pretty much in the centre of that cluster. And it did get that support. It will need support, hydrogen, to get there. So it's one of the things that the industry is wrestling with, how to keep the government ready to give support, as it did for offshore wind. Some of the other bits of kit that we're going to need, this is for liquid storage, large tanks. Well, we're already used to that, but we will need them. The world's largest liquid hydrogen plant, just hot off the press, May 2020. In South Korea, the town of Ulsan, surprise, surprise, linked in with offshore wind. And I put a figure in how much the contract was worth, just to give an indication of how Ulsan can benefit, and $244 million up to 2022 in that instance. Significant figures. This one's from New Zealand, similar thing, showing some of the integrated thoughts. We're moving away from the world of radiators and valves and pipes to large-scale projects here. And this is one off New Zealand, where they want to supply floating wind aligned with offshore hydrogen electrolysis, with onshore facilities and pipelines as well. They're not the only ones. Europe, Australia, Japan, USA, and our own Hydeploy 4 as well. So it's gone from a very small footprint here in the UK at Kiel, not too far from us, to almost a global, it's almost a quantum leap from where we are today to meet that demand. And here's some of the European ambitions. Some of these the consultancies are very good at this kind of glossy image. They do it slightly for political purposes, I feel, to engage politicians and key stakeholders. Oh, look the scale of what we're thinking about. But it is worthy of note. This is obviously an offshore pipeline grid being mooted. In wind, we have things like 30 by 2030, and we like things like that. 20 by 2020 was another one. And the hydrogen borrowing from offshore wind has come up with this 40 by 2040, and this is part of it. A couple of significant things. You'll see that the UK, very much part of, plugged into a Europe and beyond grid of hydrogen, going from St Fergus in Aberdeenshire and the East Coast in this instance around Humber, connecting into a Europe-wide grid, possibly down to Rotterdam, down to the south of Germany and beyond. And there are even links into Africa and beyond as well, the Ukraine as well. So that's what's been mooted. It sounds fanciful, this, but a lot of the kit is already there. It just needs repurposing. So it's not starting from scratch. Town gas, which contained hydrogen, was around in Victorian times. It's a known quantity. The pipelines are often capable. Modifications needed, yes. Some new build, yes. But these are the kind of ambitions that people are thinking about out there. And that's me. I have, for anybody interested in hydrogen, that LinkedIn group is actually live. If you click on this when the slides are shown up, it will take you to something of a community of the willing, if you like. There's about 100 and 130 people on there. They include people like Shell, BP, E.ON, some of the companies I've worked for. And if companies want to have a look in there and see what's current and what people are talking about, there's perhaps no better place to look at than that LinkedIn LinkedIn group. And there are my contact details if anybody wants to contact me after this discussion. Okay, and with that, Stephen, are there any more questions?
We do have another question.
Yeah.
From Gulkan. When do you think it will be possible to use hydrogen vehicles in the UK, which highly depends on the hydrogen infrastructure to become widely available? What would be the most common method to supply hydrogen to refueling stations? Would it be on-site generation or hydrogen delivery?
Yeah, good questions, both of those. Well, actually, you can already do it. There are a couple of hydrogen fueling stations opened by Shell. In fact, the first one was opened as far back as 2004 when I was still with the company. So it wasn't the quickest trajectory. I think it was for 2004 was the first one, 2016 the second one. So perhaps not as stellar a progress as some of these rather fanciful slides indicate, but you can actually do it. So there are hydrogen vehicles. I think it's a Hyundai Nexo is already available. Not cheap, but they are being trialled in the UK already. So I think some of the CEOs of local authorities and some of the oil and gas seniors are trialling these. So it's already possible, albeit on a trial basis. Germany, I mentioned, I think that figure of 5-fold increase in fueling stations was Germany, and that was in liquid hydrogen form. A couple of advantages of liquid hydrogen over, say, electric vehicles, which are not necessarily a rival. It's a much quicker fueling process. You don't have to wait overnight to charge your vehicle. It's just the same, or a couple of minutes more than you would with diesel or your fueling at the petrol station. And you leave your fueling stations in situ, which is good news for those that have already got them. What was the second part of the question, please, Stephen?
The second part is what would the delivery of hydrogen to the refueling station take? Yeah. Would it be on-site generation, or would it be?
That'd be. I mean, the chances are that they would use something that they already do with LNG, the LNG tankers already. The industry is familiar with that. So oil and gas companies are coming into hydrogen in a liquid form for very good reason, because they're familiar with it. It's not so different from what they already do. So I suggest in the first instance, they would come from, you might find places like Stanlow. It used to be a Shell site. It's now owned by SR. I would watch them for transitioning across, and I would expect that to be something similar to how they already do with diesel. We can do it on site, but obviously if you were to start, you would need to go through planning for each site. I would suggest that if I think from my Shell days, we had 4,000 fuel stations in the UK. Certainly not all of those would be suitable for hydrogen production on site. So I suspect it would be done remotely. Some pipeline, and the bulk of it, I would imagine, by vehicles, which I would imagine would themselves either be electric or hydrogen fueled themselves. So certainly in the short run, not dissimilar to how we do it for the existing fuel for transport.
We've just had another question come in from Kamar. First of all, great presentation. The question is, what funding is available for companies who want to build technology for the hydrogen industry?
Yeah.
And what are the routes to market?
Yeah. The routes to market, well, you probably have a chat with me after this call. So I've tried to show you some of the areas where it's going to happen, or if hydrogen's going to happen, chances are it's going to happen here in the Northwest. Yeah, so that's the good news. You would be looking to engage with a few key players. You might want to think about having a chat with Johnson Matthey, or senior people within SR, or senior people within Siemens. If you don't know, join that group that I showed you on LinkedIn, or give me a call, because I know those people. So there's a discussion to be had perhaps there. So what is going to happen is what's happened with offshore wind. They're going to replicate the model. And what happened with offshore wind, to gain planning, you never used to have to do this. The offshore wind people got a sector deal, which means it's supported, as will hydrogen need to be. And in return, the government said two things. We will continue with the offshore leasing rounds. We'll give you a lot of them. They'll be every couple of years, which is good news for offshore wind developers. And we will support you. We'll support you with a CFD, contract for difference. With hydrogen, the funding isn't quite in place. It's been ad hoc grants here and prizes there, so it's a bit more sporadic. But I think what will happen for Hydeploy 3 is that there will be significant prize money available to develop something on a commercial, big industrial, regional scale. People like SR and Johnson Matthey and Siemens, they know this, yeah? So that's one of the reasons they're pushing it so hard. But they've not really got a supply chain yet. They've got companies they've dealt with, but there's nothing really, there's not an incumbent advantage of people that have been doing it. You've got people like Ineos that might be a bit of knowledge, and some of the train company like Alstom. But I would say that they're going to follow what offshore wind did, which meant to reach out. So they'll have events. They'll go around like offshore wind. They go up and down the country. They go to places like Grimsby and Barrow and Hull, and they'll put it on Eventbrite, or they'll put it on the internet, on LinkedIn, and say, we are holding a hydrogen event. Come along if interested. I think we've beaten them to the punch with this, because obviously you now know that there's highly likely to be a hydrogen industry, and it's quite possible it'll be in our region. So you've got an early mover, a bit of advantage, if you like, but it will be publicised. But if you want to get ahead of the pack, chat with me, or perhaps even have a chat with Chamber Low Carbon, and we can have a further session. We'll see what the demand is out there. But they will have to engage with the industry, with people, but sometimes these things come from engineering backgrounds. They don't necessarily get the people element of it, or they do, but it comes at quite a late stage of it. If you think about it early, you can start to plan accordingly. Any other elements to that question, Steve?
We have Charlie. Do you want to go back a slide? So then your contact details are up on the screen.
Yeah, that LinkedIn group. I'll see if it clicks in. Oh, it seems to be doing something. Let's see what that. Oh, so it's taking me to a dead browser. But if you were to click in that group afterwards, it will give you a little bit of information on some of the opportunities out there for the hydrogen economy. It will connect him with me, and it'll connect him with 100 and so others that are at the forefront of the industry in the UK.
Okay. We have a final question that's come through from Ian. What do you think the future of conversion of hydrogen to other chemicals is?
Oh, not even. It's probably outside. I'm probably not the best person to answer that one, Ian. I know that there are various schemes with hydrogen to ammonia. That's probably the front runner, and that is largely because ammonia is very good for the liquid form of it. But you're probably directed to perhaps my good friend Google for a better answer than I could perhaps give you. It's a good question, but sadly it's slightly outside my remit. All I'm aware of is the ammonia field, because it works particularly well with renewables, but that's slightly outside of my remit, I'm afraid, that one.
Okay, and there is one more question from Maud again. What are the engineering implications for these new opportunities all over the world?
Excellent question. I think one of the most or the keenest advocates of this come from the engineering consultancies, because they can see the opportunities, especially Scotland, which has got a strong engineering background. So you're talking about a lot of pipe conversion, and you're talking on an epic scale. The North Sea oil and gas industry is vast. Hundreds of miles of pipelines, hundreds of miles of platforms, kit, you name it, big kit. It all needs cranes, it all needs welding equipment, it needs transport logistics behind it, just like offshore wind. There are very big similarities to it. So and then it goes right down on the engineering scale to your precision engineering, your large scale engineering, and then of course right down to your radiator manufacturers, your boiler manufacturers, your pipeline manufacturers, the steam reforming kit if we were to go down the CCS route. Depending on which technology you chose, it would give how much weighting to give to each individual element of that. But I would have said that the engineering aspect of this is absolutely vast, and it's one of the drivers of it. Engineers are very enthused by the idea of it.
Okay, I think that appears to have answered the majority of the questions. So if you'd like to take us on to the last slide, please, Charlie.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for listening, and hand you back to Stephen and Chamber Low Carbon.
Firstly, I'd like to thank Charlie for his time, expertise and insights today, and also to thank you for your attendance. We hope you found it interesting. Before we end this session, just a quick note that our next Chamber Low Carbon Live Lunch and Learn is Friday the 5th of June, just happens to be World Environment Day. The topic is how solar has changed and how it can help. And this will be presented by Jed Ennis of the Low Carbon Company. Go to the Chamber Low Carbon website for more details and how to register. Please stay in touch with us via our various media channels, and hopefully we'll see you again. On behalf of myself, Charlie and the Chamber Low Carbon team, please be alert and please stay safe.